latest weather, traffic, and news updates online at 560theanswer.com. Now, from the Signature Bank studio.
Society, the norms of our representative republic. Trump is violating the norms. And this is what you got, speaking of the left, from David Brooks over the weekend on state-funded media.
You know, one of the things I think we've learned is the Constitution is a magnificent document, but they made it too hard to change. And a lot of countries have independent prosecutorial systems, and they don't have a politician determining who's going to. And we relied, instead of a legal precedent that it's going to be separate and independent, we relied on norms. We relied on presidents restraining themselves. And it turns out, and we've learned this since the first Trump term, that norms that we thought we almost thought they were real, like concrete. And norms are really powerful, but if somebody destroys them, they've destroyed your system. And so the eruption of norms has really led to us where we are today. And then the final thing I'd say is that Lindsay Halligan, she might be a wonderful person. I don't know her. But the quality of a job of a prosecutor, like the quality of a general, like the quality of a pilot, like the quality of a journalist, experience helps. And the people who were fired because they refused to do this were experienced prosecutors. I don't know their politics, but they had lived up to the standard of their craft. And when you have somebody who's willing to betray the standard of their craft, you've got something bigger than one case. You've got an administration where people are going to do the things that are disgraceful because they just don't see any disgrace in it.
Mm-hmm. Setting aside the Lindsay Halligan issue, which I hope there is some, experienced prosecutorial support for her as interim U.S. attorney in the Eastern District of Virginia. The norms. Mm-hmm. Trump posting on social media, on True Social, of course. Last week, it was just revealed that the FBI had secretly placed, against all rules, regulations, protocols, and standards, 274 FBI agents into the crowd prior to and during the January 6th hoax. This is different from what Director Christopher Wray stated over and over again. That's right. And now it turns out FBI agents were at and in the January 6th protest, probably acting as agitators and insurrectionists, but certainly not as law enforcement officials. I don't know about all those characterizations. That's a lot of supposition, but I do know that the norm is when you have an investigation that an investigation that's really not ongoing, prosecutions that are ongoing, and you as FBI director are asked a specific question about the approach that you took on a day in question of the importance of January 6th. And to answer that question will have no impact on prosecutions because whether you had one agent or 50 agents or 274 agents or no agents, the charges are the charges. The evidence is the evidence. So why not disclose what you did and why you did it? And he repeatedly failed to disclose. And in fact, he lied before Congress, if we're being honest about it. When you know something and you say, I don't know something, that's a lie. And that's what Christopher Wray did. So speaking of the norm of the FBI director lying to the American people, lying to bodies that have oversight responsibilities, like congressional committees, lying to the American people by extension, destroying the credibility of the FBI. And importantly, the backdrop, as I discussed at some length earlier in the show, is participating, I'm talking about Comey now, participating in a fifth column action to undermine a presidential candidate and a presidential administration to drive political outcomes that you want. Are those violative of the norms of our representative republic, David Brooks? So to the extent that Comey is being prosecuted, in what I think, and we'll get George Parry's perspective on this, is a pretty straightforward case, at least on the perjury charge. Because he was under heightened scrutiny because he was the frickin' director of the FBI, and he put himself under heightened scrutiny by the judgments that he made, and then he chose to repeatedly lie to Congress, and one of those lies still falls within the statute of limitations as prosecutable, and now he's being prosecuted. That's not lawfare. That's the closest thing we'll get to accountability for all the damage that he did to that agency and to the American people's trust in their government, and unfair reputational damage he did to the president and so many within his circles, in addition to the unconscionable financial burdens placed on people who were targets of this investigation for no other reason than to keep up appearances, to provide the cover story that he needed. And I direct people's attention again to Holman Jenkins' very good column in the Wall Street Journal over the weekend. For more on all of this, pleased to be joined by George Parry, former federal and state prosecutor, regular contributor to the American Spectator, and he blogs at knowledgeisgood.net. George, thanks for joining us. Appreciate it.
Glad to be here.
What about that? What about David Brooks and his treatise on norms?
Well, look, the idea that the Department of Justice exists separate and independent of the president is nonsense. The Constitution, Article 2 of the Constitution, says that the president is the executive branch. No agency of the United States, no executive agency of the United States exists and has authority separate and apart from that of the president. And if you want to talk about norms, I'll just give you an historical example. Al Capone was investigated and prosecuted by the feds because President Hoover wanted it. He was the one behind the effort to take down Al Capone. In that instance, they used the IRS, or the Treasury Department, to go after Capone. But the idea that somehow or other the Department of Justice is this monastery that exists on a hill somewhere and they're answerable only to the gods is utter nonsense. When I was at the Justice Department, it was clearly understood that each and every one of us served at the pleasure of the president. And he could get rid of one of us or all of us with a stroke of a pen. And then, somehow or other, once Trump got elected, all of a sudden, we now have, according to the media, some kind of independent organization existing on some ethereal plane over and above that of the president. It's utter bull.
But before we get to Comey, the 274 agents that were reportedly, present on January 6th and an accounting for what they did or didn't do on that day, the importance of that. I mean, it doesn't come as a surprise that FBI had a presence there. The size of that presence comes as a bit of a surprise, at least to me. But a full accounting for what was done, and maybe bringing Christopher Wray back now that his memory has been refreshed to provide a description of what they were doing and why they were doing it.
Well, it would be nice to know. I mean, look, one of the FBI's techniques through the years has been the infiltration of criminal organizations. Okay. If you go back to the days when they were investigating the Klan in the South, they would have FBI agents or at least informants within the Klan feeding them information. I could see where if there was a concern, they might have informants or even agents in the crowd to monitor the activities. But the idea that everybody was saying, oh no, we didn't have any assets in that crowd, and now we find out that it was hundreds of them, that certainly raises serious question. I mean, I'll give you an example from history. There was a murder in Georgia involving 3 black men who were driving back from Fort Benning, going back north. They were Army reservists, and they were ambushed by the Klan just outside Athens, Georgia, where the University of Georgia is. It turns out that there were 4 Klansmen involved, one of whom was actually working for the FBI. And he was there in the car when they ambushed these guys and killed them. So, of course, the FBI was able to solve the murder. But the whole idea here is how much of the crime that's being investigated is in fact generated by these undercover agents who agitate and talk other people committing crimes.
Well,
We've seen that happen all the time.
Yeah, like
So-
the Whitmer kidnapping plot, we saw that called into
Exactly.
question too.
Yeah, that's a perfect example.
Well, the other thing it seems to me is not just their conduct, but then also if you have that many assets that are being utilized for that day. Okay, well then who's talking to who about what? Christopher Wray talking to the sergeants at arms that we've never heard from for the House and the Senate? The D.C. police chief, Stephen Sund, I don't remember him getting any interagency cooperation from the feds. In fact, he sort of openly complained about it and said how unusual it was. He wasn't getting briefings. So who was talking to who, saying what? Was there contemplation of the offer that Trump had made for National Guard deployment that was apparently rejected by Nancy Pelosi? I mean, so it's not just what they did within the agency, it's also what they did across agencies and with the elected officials that have spent the last several years preening and casting themselves as saviors of our democracy and casting Trump and everybody who voted for Trump as insurrectionists.
Yeah. Well, look, the chief of the Capitol Police Force was testifying just the other day saying, hey, nobody consulted me. It would have been nice if somebody had consulted me about what our needs were. And the January 6th committee, that nonsensical committee, they never contacted the chief of the Capitol Police to hear his views on it. And apparently he has a lot to say about the lack of communications before what happened on January 6th.
He sure does. We had him on the show a couple of weeks ago, and he's one of the few guys talking and providing detail, the kind of detail you would expect from somebody who is in the public trust, like a police chief. But I want to get your reaction to something else, too, quickly. Those 20 agents that knelt in reverence to George Floyd who were dismissed. Do you have any problem with that?
No, they should have been fired on the spot. But, of course, there was a different regime in charge back then. I mean, they were a disgrace. I remember when that happened, I was outraged. You don't take a position politically. If you're going to be in federal law enforcement, you've got to do the best you can to be neutral and to remain neutral and above the political winds. And when I saw what they were doing, I was outraged, and my old friends from the FBI from many years ago were also outraged. Plus, some of them, when they were kneeling, I was wondering how are they going to be able to get back up on their feet. I mean, the fitness standards at the Bureau have slipped over the years.
Yeah. They're arguing about whether or not they should be required to do a pull-up. We just heard that last week with Mazie Hirano. So on Comey itself, the big topic. Are you comfortable with the charges and the case as we understand it against him, at least for perjury?
Well, I don't understand the case, to be quite honest. I don't know in the indictment they say there was person number 3, who did the leaking with Comey's authorization. I don't know who that would be. I know Senator Cruz, when he was asking the question, set up a dichotomy between what Andrew McCabe, the deputy director of the FBI, had to say on the subject and what Comey said. I hope that's not the case, because unless they have independent evidence supporting their case, I wouldn't build a case on the word of Andrew McCabe. He's a weasel.
No, but they've got the Columbia professor, too.
Yeah, I hope it's that and not Andrew McCabe. But when you look at the questioning by Cruz, he's talking about, well, McCabe says this and you say that, and therefore one of you isn't telling the truth. I hope it's the Columbia professor. That would make a lot more sense.
It has to be. And I think when Cruz questioned Comey in 2020, I don't think he had that information, because I don't think the FBI, either if they had conducted interviews with that professor, it certainly hadn't been hadn't been declassified like it was last month. And I don't know that it was made even aware to U.S. senators. So I suspect he didn't know.
Yeah. Well, the thing is that Comey has already said that he provided his so-called confidential memoranda of his meetings with Trump to the Columbia professors, so that's locked in already. One of the problems you have, I've prosecuted a lot of perjury and false swearing cases. One of the problems you have is if the record of the testimony and what was being asked and what was being said is crystal clear in terms of short, sharp questions that address a particular fact, and the clear denial, then you just get lost in a swamp. And the problem I have always had with Congress and the Senate is none of those guys, with the exception of maybe Josh Hawley and Senator Kennedy from Louisiana, and to a lesser extent Cruz, none of them know how to ask a question. They just make speeches and then say, well, what do you say about that, Mr. Witness?
Yeah, right.
It's just a shaky basis to go forward on. Look, I can't stand Comey. I think the guy is a disgrace, and I hope they can get him on everything they can get him on. But unless we know more about what the government has in terms of evidence, I don't know where this thing is going. I hope they can pull it off. I mean, I hear these reports that they had trouble getting the grand jury to indict on other counts, which is why they had to resort to using the false statement to an agent or to a government agency instead of false swearing, because Comey was under oath. They say that, there was resistance by the grand jury. That indicates to me that what you had was a prosecutor who just wasn't making it clear to the grand jury what the prosecutor wanted them to do. I ran grand juries for 20 years, federal and state. And I can tell you, if you make it clear to the grand jury what you want them to do, they will do it. No questions asked. So,
well, they did come back on 2 of the 3, and I mean it's a jury pool from Northern Virginia, so there's that. Yeah.
Well, and that's where it's going to get tried, and it's in the Alexandria division, which means you're going to get, Loudoun County, Fairfax County, all the crazies in Northern Virginia is going to be in your jury pool.
Yeah.
So they got a real uphill battle on this. But the idea that somehow Trump is violating norms by taking this action, look, he isn't the one who started who weaponized government to go after an elected official. These people tried to put Trump in prison for life. They've tried to bankrupt him. They did everything they could to destroy the man and his family. And now he's in a position to settle all family business, and I hope he does. Because if this goes unaddressed, we're going to have this happening over and over again in the future. Somebody's got to pay for what they did to Trump. Otherwise, the people who so casually took over the Justice Department and turned it against an elected official, they're going to do it again in the future. This is called mutually assured destruction. You got to do this to see to it that it doesn't happen again in the future.
George Parry, former federal and state prosecutor, regular contributor to the American Spectator. George blogs at knowledgeisgood.net. George Parry, thank you.
Always a pleasure.
And he joins us on the turnkey.pro answer line.
It's news, opinion, insight. This is Chicago's Morning Answer on AM 560. The Answer.
If your cash is sitting in a safe